Hey guys, and welcome to another retro computer review video here. Now, this may look familiar to you guys if you've watched some of my other videos of late, because in those videos I did cover the LC1 and 2. Actually, I believe that was just a single video that I combined, and I did a review on the LC1 and 2 because they were very similar machines. And if you watched that video, and if you haven't, I encourage you to do so. You'll realize from the video that it was a fairly compromised Macintosh, and that was on purpose. That was to keep costs low, because what they were going for with this machine, with the LC1 and 2 and the LC3, was a low-cost color Macintosh. So they had to cut some corners and make some compromises on that machine. Now here is the Macintosh LC3, and I'm happy to report that with the LC3, they actually fixed all the issues that were with the LC1 and 2. So before we look at this machine, we need to make a quick look at the issues with the LC1 and the LC2. So the number one issue is there was, in those machines, they were running a 32-bit CPU on a 16-bit data bus on the motherboard. What that was doing, that was really strangling the CPU, that was really crippling the performance. Those 32-bit CPUs just could not take full advantage of their abilities being strangled with a 16-bit data bus. The LC3 fixes that. With the LC3 you have a full 32-bit data bus on the motherboard to go along with your 32-bit CPU. So the CPU is no longer being strangled in this machine, and that increases performance hugely. I believe even maybe up to 50% performance boost on the LC3 over the LC2, so quite a bit. The second thing we need to talk about is the memory. Now in the LC1 there was no option to add a FPU, a math coprocessor. There was also no memory management unit for virtual memory. Now with the LC2 they fixed that so far as they used a CPU that did have a MMU, memory management unit, built into the CPU, but there was still no option to add a math coprocessor or an FPU chip. That is also corrected with the LC3. So not only is the MMU built into the CPU in this machine, but there's also an empty socket, so you can have the option of adding a math coprocessor, also known as an FPU, to this machine. So fixes that issue as well. Another issue was just memory itself. The LC1 and 2 were limited to 10 megabytes. Now the LC2 did have a few more megabytes onto the motherboard, but you were still limited to a total of 10 megabytes. That is corrected again with the LC3. With the LC3, there is 4 megabytes built into the motherboard, and then you have a slot or a socket to add more RAM, 72-pin RAM. I believe this may be of the first Macintosh to actually use 72-pin RAM, but you can add a 32 megabyte stick, or lower if you'd like, but you can get a max of 36 megabytes, which is more than enough memory for the time, so you no longer have that 10 megabyte limit, which at the time was usable. It was serviceable, but it wasn't great. But now having the option of 36 megabytes really made this machine more sort of future-proof. It had a lot of usability to it. The other really minor issue was the LC1 and 2 had some minor issues with video. Like, it was very hard to get a monitor that sort of just worked with them out of the box. They really were meant for a low-resolution monitor, and you could have some issues. Especially trying to use like a PC monitor, you'd have to, only certain adapters would work, and you'd have to set it for really low resolutions, and you'd probably have to add video memory. But with this machine out of the box, it comes with 512 kilobytes of VRAM built in. So right out of the box you can do sort of higher resolutions, and I didn't have any issue just hooking this up to my PC monitor, my Sony G420, and it just worked. Whereas the other machines I really had to fiddle around with video adapters and setting them to lower resolutions, but this just worked. You can also even expand the video RAM even higher in this machine. So yeah, this corrected all of the issues. This basically what correcting all those issues turned this into was a Macintosh 2 CI in a low profile case. Slightly less performance than the Macintosh 2 CI, and of course you had less expansion options with expansion cards, but you know, it was a trade-off basically. So you basically got this really thin, they call this a pizza box case design. Same exact case basically as the LC 1 and 2, but you got rid of all the compromises they had to make. So this really made this a completely viable option. Not that the LC 1 and 2 weren't viable options. They did what they were meant to, which is provide a lower cost color Macintosh, but this one really is really a step up from those two. So let's take a closer look at it here. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at this case itself. Now this case basically is exactly the same as the LC 1 and 2. Difference here of obviously it says LC III, but other than that it's the same. So at this point it is worth mentioning that there are two versions of this. There is a version called the LC III Plus, and it actually has a faster CPU inside. We'll talk about that when I take this top off and we look at the inside. But you cannot tell from the front of this. There's also, because they will not say LC III Plus, they all say LC III. Now it's also worth mentioning that there are two case versions of this machine, though if you have a newer case version, that does not necessarily mean it is an LC III Plus. And from what I understand, even if you have this version, the older case version, that doesn't mean that it isn't an LC III Plus. So by the case, you can't really tell, although I have read that if you have a newer case version, there is a higher chance that it is an LC III Plus, but it's not a sure thing. So I do not have the newer version of it to show you guys, but they're not too hard to find online. But basically what it is Apple was transitioning more to manual eject systems, whereas this is an auto. So if I put a floppy disk in here, it gobbles it up, and then generally through software I have to eject the disk, although there is a pinhole here so you can manually eject it. But and it's kind of fancy, but it's really sort of over-engineered, and it's just one more thing to not work. It's just more components to break down, so I never really liked the auto eject drives. But the newer case, you can tell it's really easy because where the floppy drive is here, there's a kind of an indent here, and that is so when you hit the eject button and the disk pops out, you can grab it and pull it out. It's very obvious. This is also changed too, so sort of instead of kind of having Macintosh LC III like laser etched onto the case, it's more like a little indent where you can put like a sticker or a label in, and I suppose that was for you know, easily changing. So if you wanted to use the same case and you had like a different kind of computer and you want to use the same case but a different motherboard in it, you didn't have to like completely, you know, new cases with different laser etchings. You could just pop off with the old labels or just slap on new labels. So I believe that's why they did that. Back of this machine is exactly like the other Macintosh LCs. Here's our power. I believe this, just like the other ones, there's no soft power on, so you can't use the keyboard. You have to manually switch it on. Standard plug, standard, you know, Apple video connection, printer port, modem port, external SCSI port, ABD port for your keyboard and mouse. And then we have two audio ports, one for speaker and one for microphone. And then there's one expansion port, and we'll look at that when we look at the inside of this machine. I have an Ethernet card, and that's just the same card. I took this from my LC2, because when you've got an LC3, there's really not much of a reason to be using an LC1 or 2. So I basically stole the parts that I wanted from those two machines and put them in here. So this is my primary LC that I use. So taking the lid off is easy. You just unsnap those clips. This seems to be a sturdier plastic than a lot of the old Macs, so it doesn't really break as much, as easy anyways, and then you just kind of lift it off. So now we're going to take a look inside. Alright, so here's the machine. Inside it looks very similar to the LC1 and 2. We've got the power supply here. Right here we have the floppy drive, speaker, a little fan. Here's the SCSI drive. Now originally they came with a few different variations on size. This is, I believe this is a 500 megabyte drive. I took this out of the LC2 and put it in this machine. But I believe this came originally with an 80 megabyte drive. I think that was the highest hard drive that they came stock with, 80. I think there was also options for a 40 megabyte drive and a 60 megabyte drive. But SCSI drives, 50-pin SCSI drives. So here's the motherboard. Now this motherboard, unlike my LC1 and 2, the caps have not leaked, which is nice. It might just be the luck of the draw. Right here we have the PRAM battery. Usually when you get these kind of machines, one of the first things you want to do is change that, because you'll get a lot of weird issues if that is dead. I believe these are the ROM chips here. Now right here, this is a PDS slot, and the LC3 actually has a slightly different, I think it's called the enhanced PDS slot. Now on the LC1 and 2, it's just this portion, but this one has this little extra portion here, and that is so it can support 32-bit cards. Although it still can support the 16-bit cards, it will also support special 32-bit like LC PDS cards. Now, there aren't a lot of 32-bit cards for these machines just because manufacturers, it really wasn't worth it to them. I guess their thinking was, why make a card that would only work on the LC3 when we can make a cheaper 16-bit card that will work on all three and it will sell more. So that's why there isn't a whole lot that use the 32-bit, but I believe there's certain like certain video cards and stuff like that. Now here's that Ethernet card, and this is just for the regular 16-bit slot, and it works just fine. Just that little bit, sticks there, but it works just fine. Right here we have the CPU. Now this is a Motorola 68030. And we're running at 25 megahertz, where I believe in the LC1 and 2 it was running at 16 megahertz. So this one is running at 25 megahertz. Now remember that Macintosh LC III we talked about earlier? In those, the motherboards are pretty much the same, except this is a 33 megahertz CPU. So there's also ways to modify this board to overclock this to 33 megahertz. Again, that's something you can Google, but if it works or not, it's luck of the draw. It depends. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on the components and your CPU. So, but there is sort of a way to turn an LC3 into an LC3+, but you want to perform that at your own risk. Now right here this was originally an empty socket for the FPU chip. So this takes a 6882. Running at 25 megahertz, and that is your math coprocessor chip. Now, I generally do not see this chip added. I just added it myself because I hate having those empty sockets. They're really cheap. You can find these really easily on places like eBay. I don't think they do too much. I think it's kind of the same situation with sort of early PCs where you had 387s and 287s and 8087s. I don't think a lot of software really took advantage of that. And I think that might be the same way with Mac, but don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. But I don't think that was really a popular option, just because, at least for games, I don't think a lot of games took advantage of that. And we have various chips controlling things, like floppy drives and stuff. So here is our RAM. Now right here is the built-in RAM, which I believe it's 4 megabytes, and then we have a 72-pin slot, so you can add more RAM. So right now I have a 32 megabyte stick installed, so these two together, 36 megabytes, and that is the max this machine can take. And then right here, this is your video RAM for the built-in video, and 512 kilobytes built in, and then you can add more, like I have right here, for a total of, I believe, 768 kilobytes total, which will let you run a little bit higher resolutions at a better color depth. I believe these sticks of VRAM for these Macs are kind of proprietary. I think only older Macs use this certain sort of style, although I'm not sure on that. But so yeah, that's basically the inside of this machine. It's really not all that dissimilar from the other ones. Okay, so here I have the machine just kind of hastily hooked up to my Trinitron monitor right there. So there's not really much to show you on this hard drive because it is the same hard drive from the LC2, which we already looked at. But as you can see, you have to use the switch, and it will just power up. And we should get an image. So I'll just show you it, you know, booting up real quick. And then I don't really have a lot of old Mac games on disk, but we'll see if the floppy drive works. I've got like Sargon 3 and Tetris here. Hopefully we get an image. Yep, there we go. So turn off the lights. No. About this Mac, running System 7.5. There's our 36 megabytes of memory. Yep, and the label flew off the disk. And there it is. Okay, so it looks like the floppy drive may be actually working. And Tetris, I think this is black and white only version. Come on. Yes. There should be music, right? It should be coming. There's a speaker in here, so we should be getting music out of the speaker. Maybe I have to start the game. No. So this is what I meant by an auto loader. So here's Sargon 3. I think this is also for a black and white Mac. And but when you eject it, there's no, you know, usually you have like an eject button, but you have to select eject disk, and it ejects it like that, like automatically. So that's what I meant by that. So, Sargon 3. And there it is. Oop-a-doop-a-doo. Sargon 3. That's pretty responsive. It seems like it's running just fine. Yeah, I think this is a chess game. What the hell? Is that the screensaver? Yeah, that was the screensaver. I was doing things. Huh. Would this even have sound? Well, anyways. So what do I think about this machine as a retro gaming Macintosh? I think it's a pretty good deal. They aren't too expensive. They pretty much cover all the bases. The CPU is decent for the time. The RAM is decent for the time. So if you want to do like late 80s, early 90s Mac gaming, I think the LC3 is a really good machine to pick. It seems to do the job just well. Expansion's a little bit limited, but with Macs, a lot of stuff's built in. It's really not too necessary. Now, as far as size goes, this is very light and easy to move around. It really doesn't take up much less space compared to a Macintosh 2. A Macintosh 2 is just going to be, I think, a little bit taller, but I don't really think it's any wider. So as far as like desktop space, I don't really think you're saving much with this, but you know, you can usually find these really cheap. This was 20 bucks and I found it locally, so if you can find it for pretty cheap, I think it is worth picking up just for like a little Mac 2 for, you know, early 90s, late 80s gaming. So yeah, I really like the LC3. You know, they fixed all the issues with the other two, and it just works pretty good. Pretty solid case. The one thing you just got to look out for is those leaky caps, which, you know, if you're handy with soldering, which I'm not, it's not really that difficult of a fix. But yeah, I would definitely recommend picking one of these guys up if you do see one for cheap. Even on eBay, because they're so light and small, shipping isn't horrible for these, unlike certain like PCs and big like AT cases or things like that. So shipping should actually be manageable for these machines. So keep that in mind. So hope you enjoyed the video, and if you like this kind of stuff, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.